Caitlin Clark's great career is eclipsed at the finish line by the South Carolina Gamecocks of the Women's National Championship. What is her legacy moving forward? I will tell you that. Plus, the Purdue Boilermakers go for their national championship attempt tonight. Locked on Big Ten starts right now.
You are Locked on Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked on Big Ten. I'm Craig Sheeman, coming up on 40 years as a sports talk show host and a play-by-play announcer. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We are going to talk a lot about Caitlin Clark. We're going to talk some also about Zach Edey and Purdue for their game tonight. And we'll have our top 10 observations from the weekend. So let's get into it. Sunday, the Iowa Hawkeyes trying to get their national championship had to go through an undefeated South Carolina Gamecock team for the women's national championship. Lisa Bluder's last words to her Hawkeyes before they took the court versus the Gamecocks on Sunday afternoon was never underestimate your inner source of strength. Remember the words of Caitlin Clark on Saturday, she said that this is the last game of my career coming up on Sunday. I don't need any extra motivation. In the end, none of it was enough, as the Gamecocks were just the better team. You got to take your hat off to them, but it was a great, great career for Caitlin Clark. We'll talk about her legacy coming up in a moment. The Hawkeyes started out the game on Sunday on fire out of the box. Kate Martin was hitting shots. They were getting stops on defense. Before you knew it, it was a 10-0 lead for the Iowa Hawkeyes like that. Then Caitlin got her first three, and before you knew it, they were up 13-2. In fact, there was a stretch there in the first quarter where Caitlin Clark had scored 13 straight points for the Iowa Hawkeyes, including a 30-foot bomb that she's known for with those logo three-pointers. She was also fouled a couple of times shooting those. They're guarding her 25 feet away from the basket and fouling her, giving her 3 free throws. It didn't make any sense. The Gamecocks, they weren't used to having to guard somebody that far away from the basket. And it took them a minute to adjust. And they did. There's no question. But by the time we had that first media timeout, the Iowa Hawkeyes were up 20-9. We're like, whoa, what's going on here? This is pretty good. But again, South Carolina made some adjustments. They erupted on their own for an 11-2 run. They cut it to 2 right away. Clark did finish with 18 points in the first quarter. Looked like it was going to be a humongous day for Iowa and Caitlin Clark. And that included another late deep three at the end of the quarter. It was her third three-pointer in that first quarter. They took a 27-20 lead over the Gamecocks in the first quarter. And along the way with those three-pointers and those 18 points, Caitlin Clark passed Jamaica Holtzclaw for the most points in NCAA tournament history. So just add that to her long list of accolades that she has reached and milestones she has reached over her career. But this is when South Carolina goes on a 7-0 run to start the second quarter. They tie the game at 27. Camila Cardoso, who's the 6'7" player for South Carolina, she is going to be going into the WNBA draft as well. She gets a layup. It gives them their first lead of the game. By the way, Cardoso, 15 points, 17 rebounds in this game. At the end of the second, Tahina Powell hit a big three-pointer, and Iowa had thoughts of maybe answering with the last shot of the half, but Raven Johnson, who played great defense on Caitlin Clark, stole the ball off of her, had a layup and a score on the other end. It gave South Carolina's largest lead right there at the half, 3 points, 49-46. Looked like it was going to be a shootout, first one to 100 wins. It just had that feel in the first half. So Clark, who had scored 18 for Iowa in the first quarter, just scored 3 in the second half. Things were starting to tighten up on her a little bit. Raven Johnson, again, the defense by her on Clark, always had a hand in her face. was pretty remarkable. So what happened in the second half? Well, the Gamecocks open up with a 6-0 run right away. They're up by 9 now at this point. Lisa Bluter's got to call another timeout, and they got to regroup again. This is where Caitlin Clark started working inside, both with trying to drive and also some passes inside a little bit. They go on a 9-2 run to cut it to 4. But Bree Hall's 3 for the Gamecocks open up a 10-point lead with 2:30 to go in the third. It felt like the game was starting to slip away from the Hawkeyes at that point. That capped off an 8-0 run. Then Tessa Johnson bombs a 3 to put the Gamecocks up by 11 with just over a minute to go in the third. Again, Lisa Bluter's got to call a timeout, get things settled down because this thing's about to get out of reach. So heading into the fourth quarter, South Carolina Gamecocks led 68-59 at that point, a 9-point lead. Wasn't over yet by any stretch of the imagination. South Carolina did come out and extend that lead up to 13 points for a game high. Iowa then, though, regrouped. They got an 8-0 lead to cut it to 6 with 6:30 to go. And you felt like, oh, okay, all right, they're back in this thing. Let's start chipping away. Caitlin Clark and Gabby Marshall had big threes at that point. It's 76-70. But Iowa got it to 5 with 3:30 to go. But that would be it. That would be it for the run. They couldn't get any closer to that. South Carolina was just too big and strong at the end. And Iowa couldn't really get another run going. And 87-75 is the final score. Congratulations to South Carolina. It's their third school title. Dawn Staley, great coach as well. They become the 10th undefeated team to go the distance and win a women's basketball national championship. So for a moment here, let's talk about Caitlin Clark as her career comes to an end and what we think about her legacy. A lot of people are talking about that lately. A lot of people say she cannot be considered the greatest of all time because she never won a title. She got to 2 national championships, but she came up short in both. I'll say this. She's the best player I've ever seen. And she got a lot of people to watch women's basketball this year. And even Dawn Staley in her postgame took time to thank Clark for what she did to lift this sport. Clark was asked about this repeatedly in the last week. Hey, do you need a national championship? Do you need a ring in order to validate where you are in the history of the game? And she said, no, it's what I did for the sport. And it's not going to come down to one 40-minute game at the end of a 4-year career. I'm also sure the ratings will be an absolute boom from Sunday. By the time we find out, we'll probably find out here sometime today, Monday, maybe Tuesday, what the ratings were for that game on Sunday afternoon. But it was must-see TV. It was exciting. You go back to Friday's game in the semifinal, a nail-biter over UConn. That drew 14 million people. Caitlin Clark, again, helping to set a record. That's the most people that I've ever sat down and watched a women's basketball game before. And that was breaking the record they just set the Monday before against LSU in the Elite Eight when it was 12.3 million. And by the way, for those that were at the game in Cleveland, the average ticket price for that national championship was $481. That's an all-time high for a women's basketball game. So Caitlin Clark has a lot to do with all of that. So up next for Caitlin Clark and Camila Cardoso and others, the WNBA draft, which it's right around it's next week. It's on the 15th, tax day in Brooklyn. So be ready for that. It's going to be Caitlin Clark is expected, obviously, to be the number 1 pick in the draft, and we'll see where some of these other ladies go in that draft as well. But and a lot of us are wondering, are there stardom here that they've gotten in college basketball? Everybody, why is this going to carry over and finally lift up the WNBA, which has struggled with ratings and interest over the years? But we'll see. Clark is expected to be the first pick of the draft by the Indiana Fever. So anyway, what do you think about all that? It certainly was an exciting run. It was great. We love talking about it here on Locked On Big Ten. We'll get some of your thoughts on it as well. Be sure to subscribe. If you like what you see and or hear, subscribe. It's free. It's one click of a button. It doesn't require any other personal information. And you can follow Locked On Big Ten for free wherever you get your podcast. That way you get the latest episode of this podcast as soon as it becomes available each and every day. All right. What about the Boilermakers? We still have a Big Ten team alive. It's the Purdue Boilermakers in the men's national championship. That is tonight, Monday night against UConn. We will get to all of that next here on Locked On Big Ten, your team every day. You know, if you're in an office, small job, small business, and you got to hire people, you got to do it fast because you got other jobs you have to do, right? And you got to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And it's not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. In fact, it's so easy that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing a lot of hats. You got a lot of jobs, a lot of things you have to do. You don't have the time or the resources to go hire people. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make that process easier. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you for making Locked On Big Ten your first listen each and every day, especially you everydayers out there. Meanwhile, subscribe. Help us out. It's right there on YouTube. Right there. You can click it on if you're watching the video. If you're listening on audio, share, follow, like Locked On Big Ten, your team every day. And don't forget to check out our website, Talk Big Ten. That's number 10.com. We put all of our podcasts there in order, numerically or chronologically. We also group them by your favorite school, your favorite team. So if we're talking about, for example, Iowa today, you can go right to the Iowa page. Everything's right there. You're a Boilermaker fan, you go to the Boilermaker page. Everything we've done on the Boilermakers is right there. Plus, you can get swag, shirts, pennants, hats, tickets, all that stuff right there. TalkBig10.com. All right, the Boilermakers, they lifted a lot of heavy monkeys off of their back Saturday when they beat NC State 63-50 in the Final Four on Saturday. Now they get to play the defending national champion Connecticut Huskies tonight, Monday night, for a national championship. Now, the Boilermakers' amazing run through March and April has quieted the whispers that they couldn't win in March, right? They quieted the naysayers that were quick to point out how Matt Painter and the Boilermakers, you know, they're always good enough to make a deep run. They've had national championship Final Four quality teams before, but they've had an unfortunate knack for getting bounced early in the NCAA tournament by double-digit seeded teams. The worst, of course, was last year with the 1-16 upset loss to Fairleigh Dickinson. That's the one that sticks in their mind the most because it was pretty historic. It would have been ironic had North Carolina State beaten Purdue on Saturday because they were also a double-digit seeded team. They were seeded 11th, and that streak would have continued for Purdue, even though it was in the Final Four. But they won the game. Purdue did. They don't have to worry about that place in history. And Purdue played very well. And I must say, North Carolina State, that was the best defensive scheme I've seen against Zach Edey and Purdue and their guards all season long. That was a great defensive game plan by the Wolfpack. Their guards, they picked up the Boilermakers at half court. That caused the Boilermakers to have to stretch out their offense so they didn't have an easy pass in to Zach Edey down low. And that also allowed, when they did pound it in down to Zach Edey, who's 7'4", as you know, allowed some of the Wolfpack defenders to scratch away front and back and try and D him up just a little bit. It wasn't Edey's best game ever by any stretch of the imagination. He's still got a double-double just because he's enormous. But you got to give the Wolfpack credit for what they did and how they were able to hang in that game. But in the end, the problem was North Carolina State had no offense outside of DJ Horn. And you can speak about the Boilermaker defense on this too. They had something to do with that. So North Carolina State went on numerous scoring droughts. Purdue's going to win most games where they hold their opponents to 50 points. That was the case. I don't think they're going to hold UConn to 50 points in the championship tonight. So they'll have their work cut out for them. UConn did pull away from a tough Alabama team Saturday night with an 86-72 win and earned their second straight trip to the NCAA final. The thing is, some think this year's UConn team is better than last year's team that won it all, and I think they might be right. UConn has a sophomore, Donovan Clingan. He's 7'2". Okay, it's the first time Edey's going to have to go against a formidable 7-footer, another 7-footer on the other side that's actually any good. And he's the first guy that can physically hold his own against Zach Edey. Clingan is a better athlete than Zach Edey. He's a better shooter. But, I mean, this will be like the good old days, right? When we had two 7-footers battling it out for the title. It's pretty cool. Plus UConn, they got a lot of help. It's not all Clingan underneath. Purdue is Zach Edey focused. Braden Smith, they have, we're going to talk about him in a moment. But UConn had 5 players scoring double figures against Alabama on Saturday night. And they're just balanced. It's just what they do. Led by Stephon Castle, who scored 21. He's a 6'6" freshman guard. Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer, they combined for 6 3-pointers. They're both experienced seniors. And when I say they're balanced, they have multiple guys that can score. They're balanced in that they can hit inside or outside. Matt Painter and Purdue will have their hands full deciding who to shut down defensively. Overall, Purdue guard Braden Smith, who I just mentioned, is very capable, but he's going to have to play a lot better than he did against North Carolina State. The Wolfpack perimeter defense really bothered him, picking him up at half court. He was just 1 of 9 from the field, 1 of 5 from three land. It was his only basket of the night, 3 points on the night. He had 5 turnovers as well. Two of them were over and back. He never does that. It was clearly the worst game of the season for him. And UConn is going to see that on film. They're going to pick up on that. But Smith, if you haven't watched Purdue basketball here, look, he was first team All Big Ten along with Zach Edey. They got 2 of the 5 guys. Smith was the other one. He's a good player. He had a bad night Saturday night, so he should bounce back. And despite that horrible night, he did what great players do. All right, you can't score. Maybe you're turning it over. What else can I do? All right. He had 8 rebounds. He had 6 assists. So it wasn't a total loss for him. And that's why they were able to win the basketball game. Purdue got the monkey off his back by getting to the Final Four and fighting its way to the championship game. Now we'll see if they can win their first ever national championship in men's basketball. They hadn't been to a Final Four since 1980. They haven't been to a national championship game since 1969. It was the only previous time they've ever made it to the final. Together, Matt Painter and Zach Edey hope to write some new history tonight against the most balanced team in college basketball. And it's going to require this guy, Zach Edey, to have one of his finest games for sure, but he's going to need some help from some of the other guys as well. So we'll see if they can get things going and hang that banner in Mackey Arena with Zach Edey going against Donovan Clingan. This is going to be a great matchup on a Monday night. We'll see what happens here. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are too. There's a lot of good things going on here. Speaking of good things going on, I want to point out right here that the Big Ten's Michigan Wolverines are the defending champions in football. The Iowa Hawkeyes, the Lady Hawkeyes, they made it to the national championship. They were runners-up. And the Purdue Boilermakers have a chance at winning a natty in basketball tonight. Now, the SEC likes to say it just means more to them and they're great, yada, yada, yada. Where are they? Where are they in all these things? They didn't make it to any of the finals in any of these 3 sports. Do you remember my first podcast in June? You can go back and look. I told you the Big Ten is as good, if not better, than the SEC. Everybody looks at the SEC this and the SEC that. Big Ten is the place to be. That means Locked On Big Ten is the place to be. Thank you for all of you that have joined us since we started back in June. Speaking of things that you might be watching, you watch Fox Sports TV, daytime TV, little yapping talking heads, maybe ESPN. That's all they do all day. Sometimes you got to turn down the volume with all the shouting going on. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today for a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube and for free on Amazon Fire TV channels on the app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, coming up, we like to come out of the weekend with our Big Ten top 10 observations. Got a lot of them. They're focused on basketball. We will take care of all that coming up in 1 minute right here on Locked On Big Ten. All right, let's do this here. Our Big Ten top 10 observations from the weekend. I'll put them on screen here one at a time. If you're on audio only, we will describe them as best as we can. And we're going to start it off with Purdue beating North Carolina State to get to the national championship. All right, that's a good starting point, I think. Let's see what else we have here. At number 9, I want to talk about the Purdue defense that held North Carolina State to just 36% shooting and 50 points on the night. You're going to win most games that you do that. So that was really good by them. I want to talk about the Purdue three-pointers at number 8. They made 10 3-pointers against NC State. That was enough to win that game. Lance Jones and Fletcher Loyer combining for 7 of those 3-pointers. All right, at number 7 on our list, Purdue Zach Edey. 20 points and 12 rebounds versus NC State. Again, NC State did a great job. I've often talked about if you want to beat Purdue, you got to hold Zach Edey into the low 20s. Don't let him score in the 30s or touch 40. It's over then. NC State did a great job. Zach Edey scores 20 points, 12 rebounds, but North Carolina State had no offense whatsoever to match those 3-pointers that Purdue was eventually hitting in that game. All right, this looks like it's an all Purdue top 10, is it? No. All right, we got Iowa. This is from their win Friday night against UConn, 71-69. By the way, this is the first time I've addressed it here on this podcast. That was a moving screen by Alea Edwards. That was the right foul call to make at that point. So anybody from UConn that disagrees, you're just wrong. You go look at, I put every angle on Twitter. Go back and check it out at Talk Big Ten. And you can see that should have been called. Should have been called in the first minute, should have been called in the last minute. That just should have been called. And they could have called that all day long, as a matter of fact. At number 5, Caitlin Clark, the second half versus UConn. Finally got it going there. Overall, 21 points, 9 assists, and 9 rebounds and 7 assists. And we put her at number 4 on our Big Ten top 10 observations. At number 3, this is again from the Friday night game against UConn. Hannah Stuelke, 23 points on 9 of 12 shooting. She was impressive versus UConn down on the block. And I think Hannah will be the star of this Iowa basketball team next year as Caitlin Clark moves on. It is time. Hannah's just a sophomore. She'll be a junior next year. I think this will be her team moving forward. Number 3, best observation, Caitlin Clark, 18 points in the first quarter versus South Carolina in the national championship. Too bad for Hawkeyes fans. She couldn't keep that pace going. It was torrid, to say the least. The South Carolina Gamecocks, I don't normally do this in our Big Ten top 10. It's Big Ten top 10 observations, not SEC top 10 observations. But you got to take your hat off to the South Carolina Gamecocks. Their freshman, Raven Johnson, holding Caitlin Clark to just 7 of the 30 points that she scored. Caitlin scores 30, but when Johnson was guarding her, she only scored 7. Did a good job literally getting a hand in her face and tightening it down on defense against her. And at number 1, let's give a shout out to Iowa's Caitlin Clark, 30 points, 5 3-pointers, 8 rebounds, 5 assists in that final game of her career against the South Carolina Gamecocks. Congratulations to her and the Lady Hawkeyes for everything they did this season. It was a fun season. It was a blast. And that's a recap of our Big Ten top 10 observations from the weekend here, from us here at Locked On Big Ten. So anyway, I'll take your thoughts on all that as always. Always love it. Hit us up. You can hit us up on Twitter, X at Talk Big Ten number 10. Don't forget, hit us up on YouTube as well. Don't forget our website. You see the crawl on the bottom, talkbig10 number 10.com, where you can see all of our previous podcasts, get some swag, tickets. It's all right there. Hope you can enjoy all that as well. All right, that is a wrap for us here today. Thank you for joining us. And coming up, we're going to talk more tomorrow. We'll see if the Purdue Boilermakers are national champions or did they come up a bit short. We'll have all that right here on Locked On Big Ten. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast right now on your favorite podcast app and to get the latest episode of Locked On Big Ten as soon as it is available each and every day. And watch another episode of Locked On Big Ten after this one. Tell your friends about us, especially if they're Big Ten alum. Also, don't forget our friends here at Locked On Sports Today, 24/7. Check that out as well. Thanks for joining us. Can't wait to talk to you again tomorrow. I'm Craig Sheeman for Locked On Big Ten.